Welcome back to episode 7 of the Faith Unfiltered podcast. I am your host, Henry, and I'm extremely excited to talk about today's topic. Today's topic is something that we all have probably asked ourselves at one point in our lives. And that question is, if God is good, why is the world so broken? And so once again, we're bringing on Joseph today and just to see what his thoughts are on this topic. And I really hope that you enjoy it. So without further ado, let's get into it. Joseph, how we doing?
I'm doing pretty well. It snowed a little bit last night, so the kids are excited.
Oh, I bet. I bet. Do they like to go sledding or anything? Do you have that around like your farm or like hills
I'd
or?
hook them up to the ATV or usually just to myself. Although two of the kids are small enough that we can hook a sled up to the dog and then just throw a ball and the dog pulls them.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, that's the way to do it until they get too big.
Yeah. That is, I can't say that I've ever done that.
It works. It works great. The dog has fun, the kids have fun, and you get to watch, which is also fun.
Yeah. You see, the way my dad is, he's so like protective, and I'm actually kind of worried that I'll end up like this at some point. But he's one of those things where it's like, no, 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 don't do that. Like you're gonna get hurt.
Mhm.
Or no, 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 don't do that. Don't do that. You're gonna fall and you're gonna hurt yourself and you're gonna have to go to the hospital, like all these other things. He gets like so like freaked out. I think that's because that's how my grandmother was, and that's how my
Oh,
dad is. And I feel like
well, we
that's how
naturally imitate our parents especially to a certain degree. That's why everyone's worst fear is to find out that they're their own father. And it's not until you're angry or not until something quick happens with you, especially with your kids, you're like, I'm my dad.
yeah. You're like, shoot.
Sometimes, hopefully, your dad was a person you want to be, but for
Oh yeah,
many of us, that does
absolutely.
not appear to be the case.
Right. Oh man. So Joseph, today we're talking about the question that I'm fairly confident that most people have asked themselves this question at some point in their life, and that is the idea of, if God is so good, or if God is good, why is the world broken?
Yeah,
And I would just love to hear some of your thoughts on this.
yeah. So typically and historically, it's called the problem of evil.
Mhm.
So it actually goes back to the Greek philosophers. I'm forgetting his name, but essentially, if God is all good and all powerful and all knowing,
Mhm.
then evil should not exist.
Right.
But we know that evil does exist. So either God is not all good and he allows for evil to exist, God is not all knowing and he doesn't know that evil is going on, or God is not all powerful and he has no power to stop evil. And so that is the dilemma that's put together there. And there's lots of ways that we can go about solving that dilemma. I
Mhm.
mean, the most obvious way to solve the dilemma is a limitation of knowledge on our end. And
Interesting.
so, like, God, why does evil exist? And you could even split it up in two ways. We have what we call moral evils. So evil actions done by moral agents, so angels, demons, people.
Mhm.
And we have unmoral evils. So these would be sometimes the ancients would call them natural evils. Today, I prefer to use the word chaos.
Mhm.
Just for example, people would say like a tornado is a natural evil because it's caught. Like no, it's a more when we use the word evil, we typically mean a moral agent, and so it's confusing to call it a natural evil as opposed to it's just natural chaos.
Right.
In that chaos, lots of suffering occurs.
Yeah. That's interesting, and I feel like this topic can really go a lot of places just in the idea of, obviously, like you just said, like evil can cover a bunch of different things. So we can obviously start off from like at the fall and Adam and Eve and like why God would even allow that to happen
Oh
to
yeah,
begin with, all the way up to, you know, the disasters that we witness today with the idea of like mass murders, abortion, all these different types of evils that are currently in the world. And so I definitely think that it is a very interesting topic, and I kind of want to start with the fall
okay.
because I feel like that would just be one of the most like interesting parts, because sort of like what you just said, God is all knowing, God is all powerful. So like if he knew that Adam and Eve were going to eat the fruit,
Hmm.
why allow it to happen to begin with?
Yeah, and so I think the answer to that one holds into free will and free choice.
Mhm.
And also we need to focus in on what is the purpose of our existence.
Mhm.
And so God made Adam and Eve and he gave them a choice. So free will and free choices from the very beginning and allowed them to do that. And why would it be good? Why aren't we just some biological robots?
Right.
Because one of the arguments you hear from individuals who don't believe that God exists is if they were themselves God, they would create a world without suffering, or they would create a world with at least less suffering.
Mhm.
And so if I can think of a world greater than this one, why couldn't God?
Ooh, that's actually an interesting thought.
Oh yeah. And so now we have to wrestle with it. Like, okay, well, my intellect is limited. His wouldn't be. And so then if let's assume that I am wrong, which has happened before, believe it or not. And if I am wrong, then how is God right? Is another great question to wrestle with. Because now I'm trying to answer or trying to determine what about this world makes it optimal.
Right.
So in our modern society, what I've noticed is that we have a strong desire to avoid suffering.
Mhm.
I mean, the pain pill industry is explosive for that reason.
Yeah.
And it's not just because some serious injuries require pain pills, but even light, like if I have a slightly mild uncovered, I'm not talking about a full grade migraine where you can't function, but I have a slight headache. I'm going to take some Advil. I'm going to take some Tylenol. I'm going to take whatever. Like I can't like if I am slightly uncomfortable. Most individuals are slightly uncomfortable in our Western society. They're likely to go find ways to alleviate that discomfort and move on, as
Oh,
opposed
yeah, I'm one of those people.
yeah, as opposed to embracing discomfort. So, is there something inherently wrong with discomfort or suffering?
Right.
And so if our purpose of the universe is to create the most optimal universe for happiness, or if happiness is described as a lack of suffering, then yeah, there seems to be an error that God made. And so God had to have made this error because we are experiencing greater sufferings than we could be. Like I can imagine a world where, let's say a cancer patient dies just 5 minutes later than when he would have naturally died. So that way he could
Right.
have that 5 more minutes with his family before dying. I mean, no, like, more suffering, less like it's not changing the scales of suffering if you think of like a cosmic scales where God is balancing out our suffering with joy.
Mhm.
And so like I can imagine that world. Or if someone dies quicker as opposed to having a longer drawn out death.
Mhm.
Or to the random animal that is bleeding to death right now in the woods. Or to especially with all the human evils that we've done. I mean, everyone talks about the Holocaust. But the
Mhm.
stuff that was going on in China by the Japanese was far worse in number and in degree than what was going on with the Nazis.
What is that instance?
Oh, I think I'm trying to remember the numbers, but it was like 30 or 40 million. They would have rape gangs and rape targetings. The I'm forgetting the name of the town or the region of China that was invaded,
I
but
think I know what you're talking about.
The Japanese would have famous gangs. They'd throw babies up in the air and try to catch them with their bayonets.
Right, yeah.
So these things became animals, and now let's have fun torturing these animals, which were the Chinese. And so, no, the Japanese were absolutely crucial as far as their medical experiments. Like the Nazis would sew people together to see what happens, or they would freeze people or burn people to death. And the
Mhm.
Japanese did some very similar things to the Chinese. I mean, it's
Wow.
just sheer amount of evil. And also, when we think about it, like everyone always falls back to, well, if I was there, I would have been the one guy not doing it. There's always that picture of like what was it? I think it was one of Hitler's rallies, and there's a picture of the guy folding his arm where everyone else is giving the Heil Hitler.
Uh-huh.
I was like, I would be that guy. No, you wouldn't.
Yeah.
Most of us wouldn't. Most of us would be everyone else because that was the environment that we'd actually pick up that people can do crazy evils.
Right.
And so we call it inhumane, but sometimes in some capacity, our ability to do evil things is just as human. And maybe not doing evil things along those lines might be the inhumane thing. In other words, we're reaching out to a different human nature. But in the
Mhm.
West, we are so exceptionally comfortable because a lot of moral evils attributed throughout the time in history have been brought together by resource depletion. So
Mhm.
my family's going to starve unless I go over and take your stuff. And
Oh.
so once I go over and take your stuff, part of the dominance is I need to rape and pillage my way there to show my dominant force or to recruit people to help me take your stuff and they can rape and pillage. And that's how I'm going to keep them on my side. Now that was protocol for 20 to 70,000 years of human history. I mean, it's arguably still protocol today. I mean, there have been rape gangs and stuff going on all throughout history, especially in Eastern and Western, or not Western, but in third world countries and cultures that have that tribal dynamics. Like it's about the tribe, it's not about the greater community. So there seems to be a natural to do evil. And so God
That's
created a world for that to happen.
so I'm trying to think of like the right way to really word this question. So this is just the cause from sin, or well, obviously, like the root cause is sin. Does this like have to do with um sort of like how we like who we like relate back to? Sort of like you have like the descendants of Cain and then like the descendants of Abel, but like the descendants of Cain were the ones who were like the more violent and the more like gruesome in that sense. Does like could that have anything to do with it?
It could. So scripture talks about Cain's descendants building cities first.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's the first Enoch. So this is a Jewish understanding what later on back, but talking about how some of the angels, what made some of the angels fallen was that they taught mankind how to do metal work and make war and make things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so what that might be telling us is that the ability to make war, the ability to cause violence and evil in other people, which is what Cain did through jealousy, but it can also be done through feelings of necessity. So if I don't want to work by the sweat of my brow, is what God tells Adam he has to do from now on, I can just take someone else's.
Make them
And
do it.
so it could be along those lines. So when Adam and Eve first sinned, it was them causing a free choice. But the sin isn't so much eating the apple. It was God saying, hey, don't do this. This is the knowledge of good and evil. And there's also the tree of life. So what would happen? And this is always a question is like, would they have been remained in eternal ignorance if they didn't? Or would God be willing to slowly teach them if they didn't?
Hmm.
And so what if all knowledge would have been given to Adam and Eve if they didn't eat the apple, but in God's time and not their time? And so this kind of like man desires himself to be God. Man desires himself to have power, to take it for himself, those free will actions.
That's interesting. So do you think that now this is obviously what I'm about to the question I'm about to raise is really just like a theory like question.
That's all right. This is a free for all day.
Oh, absolutely. So what if Adam hadn't eaten the apple and it was only Eve? Like did Adam only eat the apple because Eve did?
That's what's implied, but the first sin is attributed to, so in the text, it's applied that Eve ate the apple first and convinced Adam to do it.
Mm.
But the first sin is attributed to Adam's transgression, not Eve's. Is it because it's not necessarily because Eve, like, so it's not a chronological sin, but Adam as the figurehead of mankind, it was his sin in particular that caused the fall. So yeah, you can definitely debate that if Adam didn't eat it and Eve did it, would Eve be forced to separate, or would Adam be forced to find a way to redeem Eve inside the garden?
That's interesting, yeah. And I guess that would make sense with the idea of that it was Adam's transgression. Just because like I've heard it, I know you love this guy to death who I'm about to mention, Dr. Dino. One of the things that he's mentioned about the whole Adam and Eve thing was that God told Adam not to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And Adam was the one who relayed that message to Eve. So Adam intentionally would have been like the stronger one in not doing it originally because he had the creator of everything tell him to not do it. And Eve just had Adam to tell him to not do it. So it was easier for Eve to fall into it in that way, which I sort of thought was like interesting. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I know how much you love
It was
Kent
possible
Hovind.
that God walked with Adam, so it doesn't. I would assume that God was walking with Eve as well.
Right.
Now, granted that Eve doesn't get her name until after the fall, so that's just a fun fact that she's a mother of all creation. That happens after the fall; it doesn't happen before. So she's just woman in the garden, and I don't know
Mm.
if that actually means a whole lot for this conversation. But I assume those two would have been together with God, walking in the Eden. But Adam was given the duty to; he was charged to guard and keep.
Mhm.
And so those words are used later on in Scripture for the role of the high priest in the tabernacle.
Right.
One of the points we draw that Adam was actually a priest inside Eden, leading worship, but he was to guard and keep. And so, how did the serpent get there?
Yeah, that is a
And also,
question.
when Eve takes the apple, it says that she gives it to Adam. So, was Adam on the other side of the garden, or was he next to her? Was he watching her engage in activity?
Mhm.
And so Adam wasn't guarding. Now, one cool fact of the Garden of Eden is I am under the opinion that Satan was a seraph, which is the highest category of angels, and seraphs in Egyptian mythology are depicted with wings.
Right.
And so I believe it's Isaiah explains that he saw a seraph too with wings. And so these are fiery serpents with wings. And so just a fun aside, because once I discovered this, I find it so fascinating, is if a seraph is a fiery serpent with wings, the highest angel, and Lucifer was one of those, when God punished the serpent, for crawling, because I've also heard, like, well, snakes naturally crawl on the ground. What is he talking about?
Uh-huh.
Well, what if that was because he lost his wings?
Oh.
Just a fun fact. But that was, like, it would be the cause, like, why did he lose his wings? Why did he want to tempt mankind? And it kind of has that natural deal, like, I want to do what I want.
Right.
And so if we're looking at the world of evil, the problem of evil, if we were meant for the minimal suffering, then God has created a world that allows for, definitely allows for suffering. But what if we were meant, and if Adam didn't eat the apple, God would have walked and guided him. So what if our purpose in this world is to develop our souls to be virtuous?
Mm.
Once I die, my soul still remains. Eventually, it'll be united back to my body in the resurrection. But I can develop the moral character of my soul in this life. And to do that, to develop moral character, is to have experienced some degree of suffering.
Right.
So I cannot be brave if there's no fear. I can't be courageous if there's no fear. When we all talk about compassion being one of the highest Christian virtues,
Mhm.
compassion means to enter into someone's passion, compassion. And
Right.
so unless someone else is suffering, I cannot be compassionate.
Yeah.
And so in order for one of the highest Christian virtues to exist, I need to have suffering. And so I would like the people like, is the purpose of life to avoid evil and have experience most amount of happiness? Or is it to develop this moral character to a degree that I become closer to God by imitating him more precisely? In which case suffering is necessary for some of that.
Right. No, that's great. I know there was a point in time when I was really going back and forth on the idea of suffering. And I guess this is like a little story time that I'm about to go into. And I don't know if I've told you this already or not. But for the longest time, this was back when I was still in college. For the longest time, I don't know why, but I was always like so scared to read the book of Hebrews just
Mm.
because I thought it was so like dense and I didn't think I'd be able to like try to comprehend it. I remember when I first started to read the Bible again, or for the first time ever. I don't know why I just said again. When I first started to read the Bible, um in one of like the Bible studies we were going over Hebrews and I was just so lost and confused. I was like, I will come back to this book when I'm ready for Hebrews, just because that was way too much for a spiritual baby like me at that point in time. And so finally the time came, Father Nicholas and I were meeting every Friday. Yeah, I think it was once a week. It was for like 30 minutes, and we would pick like we would read like a specific chapter of a scripture book or whatever. And I told him, I was like, okay, I want to read Hebrews. I've been like worried to read that for the longest time, but I wanna do that because I know like you'll be able to like guide me through it or whatever. And this was like the craziest thing for me because and you'll this answers into the idea of like the whole suffering aspect because I became infatuated with the idea of like what is so important about humans that God wanted to like create us so badly? Like what is so
Mm.
important? What is so valuable about our soul that both God and the devil want it that badly? And I became fascinated with this question and I could not stop thinking about it. And finally, it came time, it was like Thursday night, and I was like, "Oh shoot, like I haven't read Hebrews chapter 1 yet. Like I should probably read that before I meet with Father Nicholas in the morning on Friday." And so I'm reading Hebrews chapter 1, and for some reason it just like answered all these different questions for me involving why we are so valuable because it's in Hebrews chapter 1 where um they quote either like Psalm 6 or Psalm 8. It's like you made man lower than the angels, yet you crown them with glory and honor. Like that's quoted in either Hebrews chapter 1 or 2. And so I thought that part was cool, but then it talks about suffering in this sense that like Jesus had to he made himself like lower than the angels by coming down as a man. And obviously like in the sense like you and I like right now in the state that you and I are in, like we are obviously lower than the angels.
Mhm.
But so Jesus made himself lower than the angels by coming down as a man and then immediately obviously surpassed them for two reasons. Obviously because he's the son of God. I mean, he is God. That's obviously one. But then number two, it was because he was able to suffer. It was because he went through something that, as to my knowledge at least, I don't know, the angels in heaven haven't had to go through. That idea of like suffering, which this is just what I'm like gathering in my mind. And then I thought about it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the value in suffering on earth. Granted, and when you're in the moment, like it sucks. Like you don't want to go through it at all. But like when you look at it from the outside looking in, it's like like by Christ coming down, he gave us the two ways to allow humans to eventually become elevated higher than the angels, like it says in scripture that one day humans will judge angels or whatever.
Mhm.
But it's the idea that through Christ we receive the title of a son of God, son or daughter of God. That's a title, at least for the most part, that angels don't really have. I mean, I know you can use it from like other instances, whether in like the Old Testament, like the sons of God and all these different things. Yeah. But then also by us suffering, we get to go through something that not even the angels in heaven have experienced. And so I know I just sort of went on like a major rant on
Hey, it
this
was
whole
great.
like on like this whole experience, but I just thought that it's like fascinating because like suffering sucks and it doesn't make sense, but it also allows for many good things to come about after the fact.
Oh yeah, and we naturally allow suffering if we can see the short term, or we can see a idea of a long term gain in our lives. I
Right.
mean, the easiest example is working out. We all know that working out's good for us.
Yeah.
It makes us stronger, especially if you're an athlete. You need to suffer and work out,
Mhm.
and you're doing that for a long term gain. And you can see the gains, whether you say stepping on the scale to lose weight, or you're lifting weights to see if you can get stronger. You're seeing this long term gain, so you're willing to work out and sweat and cause yourself injury. I mean, literally, growing muscles is a tearing of muscles and then the reuniting of the fibers,
Mhm.
and so it is suffering in some capacity.
Yeah.
Or if you want to go with sports, like playing a game. Like, if I want to be the best basketball player, I'm not, by the way, but I have to learn all the rules to basketball. I just can't take the ball and play it however I want.
Right.
And so I have to accept rules and suffering to be good at what I'm doing if I want to be excellent at anything.
Yeah.
Because everything that you do has to have some rules around how it is done.
Mhm.
And so now, what excellent thing am I trying to do in this life as a whole?
Yeah.
The Greek word would be deification, like to become like God.
Right.
And so some would interpret that as like, wait a minute, you want to become God? You're saying, no, no, we are not becoming the same nature as God. But the analogy used by some of the church fathers is like putting a poker in a fire.
Mm.
When you pull it out, the nature of the poker is steaming red hot, like the fire. So
Mhm.
it's like the fire, but clearly the poker will never be the fire.
Right.
And if I
Oh,
pull the
that's
poker
great.
on its own, when I pull the poker out of the fire on its own, it cools down. It loses its heat. It loses its likeness to the fire.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the idea when we talk about being closer to God or becoming like God, being like Christ. Um, uh, yeah.
That's
So that's kind
cool.
of the nature of that's all the purpose of our lives.
And that's really cool. I actually like that a lot. I've never heard that analogy before with putting the poker in the fire. I think
Mhm.
that's actually like phenomenal. When when you were in the process of coming to the Catholic Church, was that ever like a thought that like or not even that, but like because you obviously you went from being a Mormon to Catholic, but during that process, you really began to have like doubts and you really began to live like the life that you wanted because you didn't
Oh
think
yeah,
that certain
like I said, I
things
went
were
from
inherently
Mormon,
wrong.
Catholic to agnostic because I don't want to address the issue, to atheist because I felt like I was superior,
Right.
back to being agnostic,
Yeah.
and eventually being Catholic.
So was this a question that you ever battled with yourself?
Regarding like your purpose in life or
N-
suffering in general?
just suffering in general. Why would God allow it? Like, did that ever come across like during your atheist
Oh,
stage?
oh yeah. So that's the number one argument given for why God can't exist by most atheists and those individuals is the argument of suffering or the argument of evil. In fact,
Hmm.
Thomas Aquinas, when I think it's question 2 in the Summa, when he goes like proofs for God's existence, his contra number one is that essentially, or number one is the problem of suffering, and the number two is essentially that like science will disprove the need for God eventually. That's Thomas Aquinas in the 12th century or 13th century. And he doesn't say it exactly like that, but similar along. And those are the only two arguments he has where God doesn't exist. If you talk to a lot of famous atheist YouTubers today, or just famous atheists, like I grew up during the New Age atheist movement, or not New Age, but the New Atheist movement.
Hmm.
So they became really popular after 9/11, and that's kind of how they resolved the world. Is that all religions lead to these evil things, and so that was a very popular movement in the early thousands.
Wow.
And so I was growing up. I was in elementary school, middle school, and high school right around that time. And so, yeah, that
Wow.
was the number one, like God, the God delusion. One of the biggest questions is the fact that there's God made a world of suffering, so he has to be so stupid or so incompetent that he can't be all knowing.
That's
Well, yeah, or like I can imagine a world. So let's say the multiverse theory exists, and there's an infinite number of worlds. Therefore, there has to be an infinite idea, a world, or there has to be one world in the infinite world that's better or more optimal than this one. And so,
Mhm.
why did God not choose that one?
Right.
Well, and the answer to that is, do we know that or not? Like you can postulate this could be the case, but if the goal is different, if the goal isn't to minimize, because the goal has always seemed to be minimize needless suffering.
Right.
And so, if the goal isn't to minimize needless suffering, maybe then I am missing, as a human, the God's goals and intentions and how this world is structured, and my participation in it. Because one example is when people bring up like animal suffering, is like that. There's no reason for a deer. So, like, let's say there's a deer who's tripped and broke its leg. Now it's slowly dying of dehydration because it can't move in the middle of the forest.
Yeah.
God is all knowing. He can see this deer. He doesn't end the suffering. He just watches it die.
Right.
Like if that was you or I, a lot of people would say that obviously we would save it. The fact that God lets it die means he's a moral monster.
Mhm.
Now, is he a moral monster, or is there some other purpose for the suffering of that animal in the ecosystem that we don't fully understand?
Mhm.
I mean, I think that's easier to conclude than God always. Like the answer is God's always a moral monster to these people, and so I feel like that's always your answer. There has to be feels like there's a shortage. But one fascinating thing is if how I weigh suffering as a whole. So less suffering is good. Most people would agree less suffering is good, especially needless suffering. But when we look at natural suffering, so suffering of animals, suffering of creation itself, um, if I could end the suffering now, the cumulative suffering would be less. So today we have the technology to end all life on Earth as we know it.
We
If
do.
we choose to end all life right now, there will be no more continuous suffering. So is that a greater good than letting life go on as it is going on now, where we have all the things going on throughout the world? I mean, we have the wars going on in Ukraine, whatever's going on in Israel, whatever's going on in Syria, whatever's going on in Nigeria, who knows what's going on in Venezuela, all the craziness that's going on. And so is that a greater good? Those are human evils, not to mention the storms, the diseases, the floods, the hurricanes, everything else. I mean, the rainforest, which is beautiful by nature. Everyone like that's why I always save the rainforest. The
Mhm.
rainforest has millions of creatures get destroyed and impaled every single day just by living in it. But it's so beautiful we wish to preserve it, but we're preserving something that's causing suffering to animals.
Right.
And so there seems to me to be like this idea that the whole is worth preserving, knowing that there's suffering involved inherently in it, like the rainforest or like preserving the oceans or any of these other ecological movements.
Mhm.
And so it could be the same with mankind. Otherwise, I'd have to conclude that, yeah, let's just end it all. And there might be some merit to that. I'm not 100% certain.
Right. No, that's yeah, that's really fascinating. I know, and it's also just interesting to think about too. It's like when we are in a state of like when we're not suffering, right? So say, I mean, obviously suffering has like its different, it varies throughout all different stages. But it's like, I mean, if you're going through a time in your life where you're really not suffering and you're having a great time at work, the family is flourishing, money is coming in, and all these different things are going great, that's like the moment when you tend to slowly but surely like back away from like God.
Mhm.
And that's like you begin to like not rely on him as much. But like through the suffering, you can, if you're in the right mindset, you can really rely on him in like that process, which I find very fascinating.
Oh yeah, no, it's a always I forget what study this was. This was at least a decade ago, so it could be off or it might even be more accurate. But essentially, it said that people in third worlds have a higher happiness index than people in first worlds, and it's not even close.
Oh yeah.
And so, you would think because there's it's called Maslow's hierarchy.
Mhm.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Essentially, if you have food, water, shelter, then you need like a social group, and then eventually you get to like the top of the hierarchy is what you're attaining, like where you can find the happiness of. And
Mhm.
so, my concern with modern day missionary work is so focused on filling up the hierarchy of needs, they don't discuss so much the gospel anymore.
Right.
They do, it's a pamphlet in the language that they're dropping the people off, regardless whether these people speak or read their own language. But usually it's in the form of a pamphlet because we don't want to be too pushy. Now, sometimes there's legal reasons, like the government will not allow you to help them if you try to do that. So I can understand for legal purposes that they're able to do at least just that.
Mhm.
But even here with like missionary work inside our own country, where people go off the other stuff, like it's not illegal for you to try to spread the gospel while building someone's house.
Right.
But a lot of people focus in on the house building, and they seem to have ceased focusing on the gospel building. But the church spread the fastest amongst people who were starving, people who were hungry, people who were, and they were still able to receive the gospel
Mhm.
and receive the words of Christ and be saved and do everything that they needed to do and excel and had a higher quality life because of it. Where today it feels like we need to solve their physical needs because they don't have the time or patience to hear about their spiritual needs. And I think
Right.
that's backwards.
Mhm.
Now I don't know how to go about doing that with everything, but that seems to be like every most major missionary groups seem to have that approach, and I don't know why that is.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that is it's good that you sort of say that too, because it's like, I mean, like, people from Nativity who go to Kenya, I mean, like, they obviously are living in an area that is far worse off than what we have. I mean, like, they're happy to receive a bathroom and whatnot. But, like, everyone that I've heard who's gone to Kenya for that missions trip at Nativity, they have nothing but good things to say. They
Mhm.
have nothing but good things to say and, like, how faith-filled they are, like, over there, and it makes them like, that's why it's, like, so spiritually enriching for the people from Nativity who go
We
there
can all
because they're
pay
like
attention to people in the
yeah,
yeah.
because they're like, "We have so much more than you, but you guys are so happy. You guys are
Mhm.
so faith-filled." And then it causes them to reflect on themselves too, which is, like, fascinating.
Oh, yeah, it was a podcast a few years ago. It was Father Mike Schmidt. I forget who I think he interviewed, like, a Chinese national,
Mhm.
and if I recall the interview, it was so intense. It was a gentleman was, like, saying that in the part of China he lived in, it was illegal to be a Christian or illegal to be a Catholic. So some areas of China, there's a Catholic church that's working and is able to exist openly. In other areas, it's not. And so
Right.
he would go to mass every single week or whenever he could, because the priest would have to he'd have to be underground, it would be secret, and have to rotate. But whenever it was available, there was nothing in the world that would stop him from attending mass.
Mhm.
He eventually was able to get to America, and he was blown away because not only do we have mass every week, we have mass every single day.
Right.
And so he was just like, "Man, like, how could you guys not?" And, like, especially how Americans are nonchalant when it comes to of a mass. And so he started going to mass every single day, and he was so happy, so excited. And then after time goes by, he goes every week. And then after about a year or two, he starts skipping a week here and there. Like, it wasn't that bad. And then it kind of dawned on him that American excess did more harm to his soul than Chinese communism.
Wow.
Like that's what stuck with me. I'm like, oh my goodness. And it is true. Like we have such a ridiculous amount of excess that we consider mild, uncomfortable events, light headaches, mild scratches, mild bumps, mild hiccups. Like if my computer's not working, it is the end of the world. Like that's the suffering that we can't handle. When there's people who have legitimate physical and suffering and that they go through, and we can't handle it, but they can.
Wow, that's crazy. I never thought of that. When and you said that this was A podcast or a video with
I think it
Father
was a
Mike
session
Schmitz?
presents with Father Mike Schmidt.
Oh my god, I'm gonna have to try
It's
to
been a few
find
years,
this.
but I have to look that up, but I'm fairly certain that's the case.
That's yeah, so it's really just the excess that we have. It that is quite remarkable.
Mhm. So yeah, excess seems to attribute to less happiness and not more.
Right.
And so we would attribute excess to be like, oh, I should have less suffering, or but well, is suffering making us happier then in some capacity?
Mhm.
I don't fully know. Because I guess one thing when we talk about the problem of evil is when you talk to someone about this, make sure you know where they're coming from and why. Because I can explain, like, well, I think St. Augustine said, like, yeah, the problem of evil, God can make all good things out of evil. So the God can create a greater amount of goodness from the evil that is allowed to exist than what would have been otherwise.
Right.
But if you have a son who just got hit with a DUI or died in a car crash, or your 3-year-old child has cancer, that person is not in the position to hear a logical argument about the problem of evil.
Yeah.
And so that's also like when you do have these conversations, like you can just go ahead and say that and you just completely crush the person because what they feel like is that God decided to crush me so I could become better.
Mhm.
I can't handle that, God. Take it away. I wish you wouldn't have crushed me so.
Mhm.
And I don't blame them for feeling that way at all. In fact, the book of Job is a great example for that.
Yeah.
So the book of Job did nothing wrong, but he was still punished. And then afterwards, so he's lost his family, all but his wife. He's covered in boils. He's lost all his food and stuff. His wife walks out and says, "Why don't you just curse God and die?" Oh, yeah, curse God and die. That's what. And like, there's something so I love the Book of Job because there's something so visceral about that. It's just like if you experience real suffering, like the stuff I just mentioned, I mean, that's exactly how you feel.
Yeah.
And so I would definitely allow people, if they approach you like, well, God can't exist because why would he let this happen? That's where compassion comes in. Like, that's why I say it's one of the highest Christian virtues, and that is to enter into their passion. So, I mean, you can try to reasonably explain to them, but that falls flat and also it makes them feel like their suffering's not that bad. Or
Right.
especially if you're one of the Christians that think, well, like Jesus Christ died on the cross. Well, great, my son's still dead too. Like, I'm not ready. They're not in the position to be ready to hear about the suffering of Christ or the suffering of anything else. Like, they are just so suffering themselves.
Yeah. I heard this story. You've probably heard it too at some point when I did it was a reel, and it was this guy who was talking about, like, his most the time when he was the most disappointed in himself because he was talking to someone asked him, like, "Do you think people who commit suicide go to heaven?"
Mm.
And that's why he didn't, like, believe in God because he had this idea that we have, like, this full-blown belief that, like, if you commit suicide, like, you're going to hell. That's all that there is, you're going to hell. And this guy who's responding to him just hits him with this major refute on why God is real, all these different things, starts talking about evils. And then the guy who didn't believe just completely shut down. And the guy goes, the reason why I asked you that question is because my child committed suicide.
Mm.
And the guy who tried to refute was so heartbroken that he allowed his pride to kick in and immediately go into the immediate, like, refuting part rather than saying, why are you asking about that part particularly? Or, like, what is it that's making you ask about the suicide aspect? Did something happen? And then approaching it from that angle. I mean, that story was super sad. I mean,
Oh,
extremely
yeah.
sad. And that's like it sort of made me a little more cognizant now of, like, if I am talking to someone who doesn't necessarily believe, it's like, okay, why? And did something happen for you to believe that?
Oh, yeah. In my younger years, I always prided myself in having arguments and debates.
Yeah.
And my mental image was I had an obligation on myself to show them how wrong they are.
Right.
So I'd have no problem making people ridiculing people and mocking them and being just what I would call kind of a scummy person.
Right.
And now I'm older, I definitely see like that's not you don't win people, especially deep held beliefs are not won by good argument.
Mhm.
And so how do I react to someone who has a situation like that? I mean, I'm so sorry for your loss. You're with them. What I love with the book of Job is that his three friends show up, and I believe it says that they sat next to him for 3 days and didn't say a word.
Mhm.
So sometimes you just have to be with somebody. You don't have to have the answers. And if they press you for answers, you can try to share to some degree, but it's just like even like I just don't know. Because the argument is like let's say God can make a greater good out of this. How? They're like, well, like it's not for me to make it's not for me to determine how God does,
Mhm.
but I trust that He will. And then my response would be, well, I hate your God. I understand, and that's okay. It's
Right.
okay to hate God from time to time.
Yeah.
I mean, when you read the Psalms have several Psalms just talk about God, like, I wish you left me dead. And then it ends. Like, there are some very unhappy Psalms.
Yeah.
Because that's David pouring his heart out. So we don't want to censor ourselves the way we think to the degree where I can't have suffering or I can't be upset with God for it.
Right.
Because then we'll lead to those conclusions that God must be evil, God never loved me, God any of this stuff here. But no, be fully authentic, especially by yourself with God.
Mhm.
And invite him into your suffering as well. So that's one thing as Catholics, we talk about lifting it up or raising it up. And I originally thought when I first heard that, I thought that was a Catholic's way of saying man up. Oh, that's like, yeah, just man up, like, just lift up your sufferings. But now we realize that we can unite our sufferings to Christ on the cross. And
Right.
that doesn't make his ministry better, but it does build us up. We now suffer with purpose. We're suffering to change. We're suffering to grow and become
Yeah.
that deified person. To suffer with Christ, essentially.
Yeah. I know some of my most intimate prayers with God are when I am, like, aggravated or mad at him. And one of the things that I tell people, and I could totally be wrong when I'm saying this, is, like, if you're mad at God, like, let him hear it.
Oh,
He
he
can
can handle
Oh,
it.
yeah, yeah, he can handle it. And the thing is that he's gonna be so happy at the fact that you're giving it to him, in the sense that you're going to him. Like, you could easily be mad and be like, "You know what, God, like, I don't wanna talk to you anymore." And you stop praying to him, you stop reading the word, you stop going to mass, you stop going to church, whatever. But then rather like, that's the negative side. But if you're mad at him, I'm always like, "Yeah, let him hear it." Like, I've said curse words in my prayer at like, with God, and, like, 'cause I'll be so angry at times. And like I said, like, those are the most, like, intimate and, like, deep, like, prayers that I've ever had. And
Absolutely.
I also think another, like, interesting thing too is, like, sort of like what you just said too with this with, putting ourselves with the suffering of Christ on the cross. I mean, it just sort of made me reflect. It's like, it is easy for us to get mad at God when when these sufferable things happen. But how much more comforting is it knowing that we don't have a God who is just like, "Yep, you guys are gonna have to suffer and do, like, these things to become more like me." Rather, he's like, "No, I'm gonna come down and I'm gonna suffer for you guys so that way I can relate to you in that way," which is, like, sort of nice
Oh,
to
yeah.
to think about, which is really cool.
Well, especially if you consider what did the pre-Christian world look like with the pagan gods?
Oh, probably a lot of, like, what, like, human sacrifice and stuff?
Well, there's
Or
some of that depending on which gods, but even like the Romans rejected human sacrifice, so did the
Mhm.
Greek.
Mm.
To a degree. And so but even, like, the idea of it but why were they sacrificing to the gods?
So they didn't have to suffer? Or
Or they would suffer less or to placate, and so people were God's playthings, essentially.
Oh, right.
Or gods would sponsor, like, this was our god for our village or city, and so we're sacrificing because we want him to help us, or he's punishing us, or we want him to stop. But the idea that I could relate to the god, like, the idea I could relate to Zeus, or the idea I could relate to Mars, or any of these other deities wasn't on the table. And so they had fickle emotions like we did. So they weren't all logical or reasonable. Like they could just be bored. Like I'm bored, so we're gonna kill all these people.
Right.
I mean, that was the Samaritans' cause. So for like the Epic of Gilgamesh, like why God flooded the world,
Mhm.
it was too loud. And so we have the Hebrew version, but we also have this other version. And like, yeah, it was too loud. So we just flipped that side. We're just going to silence humanity for a little while, kill a bunch of them. And then like, that was just to give you the idea, the loftiness of it. So I lived in a state, if you were a regular peasant, like you would pray to the gods, hoping that they wouldn't at least punish you. At the very least, they'd leave you alone. And so I mean, there's just no hope in that world. So what
Wow,
blew
that's
my
crazy.
mind is that, yeah, when Christ became man and they accept that God became us to raise us up, he gave us something that didn't exist for the most part. That was genuine hope.
Yeah. Yeah, real love. That's fascinating. So, how would you go about obviously like what we talked about earlier in the podcast, like there are different measures of like suffering. So like if you were someone who obviously whatever it is I'm suffering through doesn't anywhere compare to what other people are going through right now.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it's a death of a loved one, death of a child, death of a parent, or just the world is crashing down on them. What would be a good piece of advice for people who are like truly suffering in that sense?
Hmm. In that sense, I'd say to embrace it.
Embrace it.
Yeah, because a lot of people, once they truly suffer, that's when they turn to things to hide it from it.
Mhm.
So drugs, alcohol, denial. I mean, there is a reason why we have that what is it, the cycles of grief, the
Mhm.
stages of grief. I think those are very real stages.
Yeah.
And they you don't have to lose somebody, you lose something and you'll experience the stages depending how it goes. I mean,
Mhm.
I use that to describe my own faith crisis when I was transitioning from a one religious faith to another. I
Mhm.
mean, the stages of grief is a very good way to describe that. But also, yeah, if you lose a loved one, like, yeah, that's where you have to genuinely embrace it. And that can be very hard. In fact, today I'm actually terrified because of the AI stuff. Have you seen these?
Oh, like the videos of people?
Yeah, so if you lose your mother, if you have family videos, you can upload it to the system, and it'll
Yeah,
have her image, and now you can talk to her.
that's scary.
That's yeah. I'm like, "Well, I'm talking to my mom." No, you're talking to an image of your mom with some of her memories.
Yeah.
And, like, it doesn't help people cope with reality, like, you're trying to skip the stages of grief. So I'm trying to reduce my suffering by not embracing it, by making this artificial mom or this artificial child, this artificial what you have you of it.
Yeah.
Or people turn into just copious amounts of alcohol or other forms of drugs or things to escape it. So the
Mhm.
worst you could do is try to escape your suffering.
Right.
Lean into it. And that's where you have to wrestle with God. And yeah, the only other time that someone wrestles with God, which I always find fascinating, is in Genesis, and it's Jacob.
Right.
Jacob has two theophanies. A theophany is like an image of heaven or an image of God. Theo is God. Theophany is
Mhm.
that. And so the first one is famously is Jacob's ladder. And that's after he tricks his brother Esau, takes his blessing, or tricks his father, takes his Esau's blessing, and then is fleeing because he's afraid his brother's going to kill him. And that's when he gets his two wives. So 14 years later, gets his two wives, has a massive stuff. He's worried that his father-in-law is going to kill him because he has now a bigger flock. Remember Jacob's sheep? And then
Right.
he brings him back to his home country, and he sees that his brother has a caravan of people waiting for him. And so he thinks his brother has an army of people coming to kill him.
Mhm.
And that night, the night before they meet, that's when he wrestles with the angel. He wrestles with God.
Yeah.
And so it's in that wrestling that he gets hurt. No, so he hurts his hip, and before he leaves, he demands that this angel bless him, and so he blesses him. And then the very next day, he finds out his brother, who is an awesome person. He was dumb. You shouldn't sell your birthright. You should value what you have. That being said, your brother stole everything from you in that regards, and he comes back, and he's just so happy to have his brother again.
Right.
So Esau's like, Jacob, yeah, and they hug it out and they divide and they live peacefully and like and we reread that thing like he had every reason to want to kill Jacob,
Right.
and so it was just absolutely wild to me. But it's that wrestling. So far as Jacob goes, like that's when his moment, like oh, he said he's experiencing this suffering. Am I going to lose everything? Am I going to lose everything? Am I my wife, my kids, my wives actually? Am I going to do this stuff here? And so that night he wrestles with God, and so it's okay to wrestle with God. And when you
Mhm.
wrestle with God, you often end up hurt.
Right.
And that's something people can reflect on is why would I end up hurt? Because God is able to reveal things about yourself that you don't know yet.
Hmm.
because he doesn't want you to stay you. He wants you to become a better person. He wants to become
Right.
more virtuous. He wants you to become more Christ-like. So as we were talking about that poker in the fire, so the poker gets hot. It gets very hot. It's
Right.
hot fire. And St. Paul even talks about fire purifying metals. So you could even look at it that way, where you're becoming purified in the process.
Yeah.
And so that does not appear to exist without suffering. And so embrace
Wow.
your suffering, wrestle with God about your suffering, and you can become a good person. It's
Mhm.
only when you decide to take it in your own hands, like Adam taking the apple. I'm going to take this in my own hands, and that will allow the same pressure the suffering happens, because the suffering does not going to go away. But that pressure that could form you to be something better can also twist you and corrupt you.
Mm.
And so when you let it in God's hands, you can be made pure. And if you let it in your own hands, it can corrupt.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's good. I know an analogy that I've heard before too is like it's been drawn out of like I'm pretty sure it's in Romans when they say, "Does the potter not have the right to shape clay in different forms and whatnot?" And I've heard, I feel like it's in Romans. It's either that or it's in
Just thinking, like, is
Corinthians.
there
I don't know. It's either I could totally be going crazy. It's either in Romans or somewhere in First or Second Corinthians. Definitely within one of those three. Totally wrong, but
we can look it
I
up later.
yeah, I feel like it's in Romans. Um, but anyways, I think it's, like, interesting. I've heard someone, like, word it like, you are the clay and God is currently in the process of, like, forming you into who he wants you to be, and, like, you have bad clay that God has to take out, throw away, and keep forming you into the person that you're supposed to be, which is really, really cool. But total side question. We
Yeah.
talked about Jacob and Esau. Um, how come in the Bible at some point, it's somewhere in the New Testament, it says, Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. And it's talking
Mm.
about God saying that.
Yeah, especially with the idea, like, can God hate people?
Right.
And so, because we believe that God loves everyone, so is there some people he hates, or does he love them differently?
Mhm.
I would put in that's more of referring to God's blessings, if I recall. Let's talk about blessings.
Okay.
Jacob received the blessings, Jacob he loved, and Esau he didn't receive the blessings.
Mhm.
So I
Oh,
think,
so that's just why.
yeah, I think that's what it would I'd have to look more at the Texas, determine what the further context are. But yeah, I've heard definitely that one. Like Jacob I loved, Esau I hated, and it's referring to other people. I think in the context around blessings.
Yeah.
And so I think
Okay.
that's Esau didn't get the blessings. In fact, Esau gave up his blessings.
Oh, that is interesting. Okay, so God didn't necessarily, like, hate him, just, like, took the blessings away.
Yeah, took the blessings away, or like depending on what you mean by hate. Like, so that's always another thing is like, did we hate him in regards to not make him? So no, being created is a good, and so God would like his creation.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I'm not sure exactly how we would wrap our heads around that one without thinking it was simple as just using a terminology to describe blessings. And so if you reject God's blessings, you could say that he hates you in that sense. But
I
it's not an
see.
active state of hate, it's more of a passive state of hate, I think.
Right.
But
Okay.
I'd have to double check that one. I'm not feeling super confident about that.
Yeah. That is so funny. Oh my gosh. Um, okay, yeah. So I think it's in, I think it's in Romans 9, by the way. I
Ooh, there you go.
think it's in Romans
Pulling
9.
out the cell phone to the conversation.
It's driving me crazy. It's like when you feel like you know something, but, like, you're just not sure.
Mm,
It's like I have to fact check it. But, at least I hope it's in Romans 9. I'm, like, trying to multitask. That's never a good thing.
yeah.
Um, well, Joseph, I think or go ahead.
Oh, the only thing I was gonna add to our conversation is this, since we're talking about suffering
Yeah.
and how suffering appears to be the only way that, like, we do grow in virtue is through some form of suffering.
Mhm.
Or you can, like, if I fast, it's not just to lose weight like that, that's a suffering of some kind, and it's
Yeah.
meant for me to not be dependent on certain things. And
Mhm.
so that is why, when we eventually we'll talk about purgatory. But that is
Yeah.
often why purgatory is determined to be a place of suffering. It's that cleansing fire, but it appears to be like if we take our mind off of, like, if we have the idea that life, existence, even is supposed to be about lack of suffering, most of optimal happiness. then
Mhm.
I think we're missing the mark. But if we think about our job is to become perfect, to become like Christ, to become purified, to build up in virtue. And so, if on this life we can only build up in virtue through degrees of suffering, now not all degrees are the same, but degrees of suffering cause us to build up in certain virtue, similar to working out does. Then, if we get purified in the next life, and we would call purgatory as a puritive process, then that similar concept would apply. The spiritual sufferings that causing us to have increase in spiritual virtues for us to be prepared to go into heaven.
Oh, wow.
So just the two relate. Like at least I think our human nature is so precise or so unique that we can apply that to our spiritual realities even after this life to a certain degree.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm excited for when that topic comes up too. Just about purgatory and everything. But yeah, no, the concept of suffering within both, it's very, very intriguing
Oh
to
yeah,
talk about. Oh gosh, I love it. I love it, I love it, I love it. This stuff is always, like, the best, and it's also fun too.
it is. I enjoy it.
'Cause it's one of those things, it's like, you'll never go past the tip of the iceberg, like, at all. Just 'cause, like, an iceberg, if you look up, like, a photo or whatever, obviously, you probably know it looks very small, like, in the process, but, like, the depth.
80% of his mass is below the surface,
Right,
or
and it
90% like that.
yeah, and it's like, you'll always just be towards the tip. You'll never really, like, break that within, like, knowledge and stuff, so it's endless. But Joseph, I want to thank you again for coming out for episode number 7 of the Faith Unfiltered podcast. It's always a pleasure. And
It's
so
fun.
with it's a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to the next one. And with that being said, we hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Thanks for tuning in.
Enjoy.